Thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. The show is Africa Showdown. We're coming to you from Kenya's capital here in Nairobi. I trust that your weekend is going on well. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and it is a pleasure to have you on board. And we are joined by Dr. David Matanga. Doc, if you can hear me, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Miriam. I am in a situation where I might not be able to speak properly, but good afternoon. Thank you very much for all of you joining Punchline Africa TV. Because of the communication breakdown, the planes are not leaving. We are stranded in a certain airport on a peaceful mission across Africa. But I hope we shall be with you sometime next week when the situation changes. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So before we get into the conversation, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say before I go further, so that we excuse you in case you're not able to.
First of all, the COP27. First, I would like to pay my condolences to the plane crash that took place in Tanzania a few hours ago. I haven't got the details of how many people perished or how many people survived, but we pay our condolences. Point number two, we would like to pose one question that in Africa, also people striking should take in account the people whom they serve. If it is stakeholders, they should ask us whether they want to strike or not. Because now you pay your ticket and you have found yourself on an aircraft, on an airplane, and you are not coming back. So you can see it is a terrible situation. Seriously, almost people are stranded across the East African region, the world, and wherever it is, regionally in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in America, everything is grounded. That is one of the points that I wanted to make. Secondly, also, I am pleased that the COP27 has kicked off in Egypt. What is in for Africa? I don't know. What will Africa bring? I really don't know. But what Africa should emphasize is the polluters, the key polluters of this universe, namely Russia, also namely China and the United States of America, must give at least a tangible money on the table for Africa to come back to work on the programs of ecosystems, to keep our ecosystems and to keep our, climate checked. Otherwise, if we come out of COP27 with nothing, promises and declarations and agreements, we shall run a risk of having the worst nightmare of life in 10 years to come. We did this in COP26, and we came out with a lot of promises. Some of them, Miriam, have not been honored. $100 billion not paid. Now the situation is even worse with the war in the Ukraine. We are not sure whether we shall come out with anything. As far as Africa is concerned, I don't know. I don't think they will be able to come out with anything. And it is unfortunate that we have got this problem going on, and nobody has been able to get ourselves out of it. We should encourage our people to plant more trees. We should encourage our people to tilt the land properly, like the way we used to do on the mountains. When it rains, it is too bad. When it is hot, it is too bad. And yet Africa is a continent that has got all the things that God has promised to the world. We have a good weather, good climate, good vegetation, trees. But Miriam, we have a problem. We have not utilized them. 66 years of independence, we don't even have anything that we can make a solar systems that can do irrigation. Solar irrigation system in Israel produces food enough for them, but we can't do it. We are busy talking, and as we speak right now, we are busy having every country in Africa is asking for relief to feed people. The World Food Program is one of the busiest organizations of the United Nations, especially the Horn of Africa. Medium, it is a pity. And yet in some African countries, you find that the food is just being wasted. We don't have a food policy on the African continent at all. Time has come for us to have a food policy on the African continent. If we are to survive the next 10 years, we better start working now and don't regret later. And I just want to say one parting shot that for Africa to be a great continent, we should forget the blame game. I said it in the morning, and I have seen somebody in your country has quoted. If we kept on talking about Hitler every day, I don't think people in the world will be doing the work that they are doing. Let's start working. Let's look at the present and the future. Instead of going back, Africa must move forward. We blame colonial masters, yet we are the people cutting the trees, Miriam. We blame colonial masters, yet we are the people digging for minerals, cobalt. You saw the film of cobalt, how people are suffering to degrade the land of DRC Congo. So this is our problem, and that problem must be solved. I hope COP27 will come out with something that will teach Africa a way forward. Any questions?
Not quite. I guess we'll just wait to hear what our leadership from the continent will be presenting, or the expectation at the COP27 that is set to start officially tomorrow, the 7th, I believe. But right now, leaders have started thronging that place that is hosting this year's COP27 in Egypt. Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which is a desert resort. So that's where the world leadership is gathering on this very important conference. You wanted to add something? Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to add something. Most of the African leaders go to these conferences as a matter of show. If you can see the type of delegations that have been housed into these conferences, should be delegation. But when they started talking, only 3, 5, 10 people, and the people they came with, they don't mobilize people. They don't mobilize others to speak. They speak for themselves. In fact, they are addressing themselves like they are in their country. So unity of purpose. If you are going to demand something from this COP27, Africa does not have that unity of purpose at such conferences. Believe me or not, starting.
Very well, thank you so much for that. So before we get further into the conversation, let me bring us up to date with the latest headlines from across Africa. We start with those ones quickly from Kenya. Sunday Nation, the main headline, Ruto's first major storm. That is the main headline. Kalonzo leads race for Raila's political maze. You'll find that on page 12 there. The Sunday Standard, also from Kenya. Back with a bang. Last week, Azimio leader Raila Odinga welcomed Eugene Wamalwa to the opposition, but the ODM chief, who cut his political teeth outside government, equally needed such a welcome after the March 2018 handshake took him to the sanctums of power. Now he has brought together an array of big hitters to keep Ruto's government in check. That story is on page 21, page 22, and page 23 inside the Sunday Standard. Kinoti, a man in the crosshairs, and Ruto leads action to combat drought. Presidents and select cabinet secretaries spread their arms across the country, breathing life into the country's relief food distribution efforts in wake of worst drought in 40 years. The story is on page 8, 9, and 10. All right, let's now just turn our attention to some of the newspapers from across the region. The Nation Sunday, that is from Malawi, broken promise as Chakwera exceeds his external trip quota. An Egypt trip takes exception. That story is inside the Nation on Sunday from Malawi. The Sunday's Times also from Malawi. No clear sight to end of fuel crisis. And then Malera takes on Zamba over Buluma hiring. That is also from Malawi. The Daily News from Egypt, COP27 kicks off in Sharm el-Sheikh amid wide international turnout. And 15,000 COP27 participants from different nationalities arrive in Sharm el-Sheikh airport. And still on the same paper, Health Minister inspects healthcare facilities. Benny Swift, I believe. So that is Daily News from Egypt. The Citizen from Tanzania, what's at stake for Africa as world meets at COP27? I think very important question there. The Citizen on Sunday from Tanzania is posing, and that is what we shall be seeking to find out this afternoon. Nairobi Accord key to peace in DRC. Very well. And detached building shape economies of Zanzibar and Tanga. That is also there. And uniform university fees in East Africa proposed. That would be nice. I don't know if that is even possible, but if you still have a dream of having one block in the name of East African community, so perhaps there are some of the things that you might need to consider. So that is the Citizen from Tanzania. The Sunday Times from South Africa, Motlanthe wants Cyril. I guess he wants President Cyril Ramaphosa. A president should be impeachable, unimpeachable. Okay. Very well. The Daily Trust from Nigeria, real reasons behind Nigeria's unending fuel scarcity. The Guardian also from Nigeria, transparency issues becloud 1 billion barrels oil discovery in North. Okay. And then the Sunday Monitor from that is from Uganda, how government dished out 840 billion Uganda shillings. And just up there, people and power, is Muhonzi following in the footsteps of Gaddafi, Mubarak's sons? That's a very good question the Sunday Monitor is posing there. The Sunday Vision also from Uganda, over 1,600 police posts shut down. Territorial policing under review across the country. That is the main headline. And the Daily News, this must be from Zimbabwe, Harare in angry retort to London. So that is what we have there. And I guess some papers from across other parts of the world. But I think I'll just keep it to African papers this afternoon. So thank you so much. You are now up to date. Samuel, I wish a very good afternoon to you. And thank you so much for finding time to be with us today.
Very good afternoon to you, Miriam Ogutu from Communication Head Office. Good afternoon also to Dr. David Masanga and all our viewers who are watching this program here in Kenya, Africa, and indeed the rest of the world. It is my pleasure to join you on this program, Miriam.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, Doc, from where he is, I think he's been affected by the Industrial Act. I don't know, but we know that about 10,000 stranded as all KQ pilots ground aircraft. Would you like to say something about that before we move on to our topic of today?
Well, thank you so much, Miriam. One, just to say that it is very regrettable and unfortunate that the pilots had to go on that strike, rather to down their tools, which has affected so many activities in terms of local tourism and also international tourism, because people are not able really to fly from one region to another, especially within Kenya, and also the rest of the world, of course, using the Kenya Airways planes. That in itself really has caused a lot of trouble and economic downtown for KQ and also for Kenya as a country. And I think government should have moved in swiftly at the time when the pilots had issued the 14-day strike notice, because this is not something that just came from the blues, Miriam. It is something that there's been an ongoing discussion and negotiation between, of course, the Kenya Airways management and the pilots, for that matter, and also the government on the other side. But I think nothing really came to fruition in terms of those talks. the continuous bargaining agreement, and so many of other allowances that the pilots needed addressed were not addressed by the time, of course, the 14-day strike notice lapsed rather. So generally it was regrettable, and it still is. It's very unfortunate, and I think government should have done better in terms of coming on table and sitting down with the pilots and the administration or management of KQ to find the way forward before we get to ourselves where we are. We've seen passengers being stranded and desperate in various, of course, in various airports here in the country, just awaiting, say, for example, to fly from one region to another. But I'm also very glad that at least some of the operations have resumed partly, though, and this just gives us a glimpse of hope. That perhaps as negotiations continue, that maybe by the end of the day we might see a white smoke where government, the management of KQ, and of course the pilots will come to an agreement so that the Kenya Airways can resume full operation for the benefit of our passengers, for the benefit of our tourists, and also so that the economy can continue to thrive. We all know, Miriam, like yesterday, it was estimated that about 300 million had been lost simply because of that strike that, of course, happened yesterday. You can imagine if this was to go for, say, a week or 2 weeks or even a month, we'll end up losing a lot of revenue, a lot of money, and more so also, these pilots have been threatened that they will perhaps they may end up losing their jobs, because I think by the end of the day, government must find a compromise or a middle ground in addressing these issues. You and I understand that it's so expensive really to train one single pilot. So if you are to retrench all the pilots who went on strike, then you can imagine what it will take in terms of resources and time also to try and train new pilots whom we can first really to fly this aeroplane. So it is something that I will really call upon government and these other stakeholders involved, including the pilots themselves, to really be considerate and sensitive enough to the plight of the passengers, and also look up to the plights of the pilots themselves, and the issues that are raising must be addressed so that they can resume full operations. Miriam.
All right, very well, thank you. Thank you for that. Now, activists have criticized the previous UN climate talks, calling them slow, complex, and ineffective, as countries across the world fail to meet climate commitments to keep global temperatures below a fateful 2 degrees Celsius. Can this year's COP27 in Egypt rise above the failures of the past, or is it destined to disappoint? Or are we likely to just see what has been happening? So for the last 30 years, the annual conference of the parties, also known as COP, has been the course caliber of international climate talks. This year's COP27 kicks off today in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt under the aegis of the UN. Some 200 countries will take place, along with various companies, NGOs, scientists, and of course journalists. Although these monumental talks are meant to bring solutions on how to tackle climate change, they are often criticized for bringing a scant number of results to the table. So for some people, this is just something that just happens for formality. And as one environmentalist, remember the young Swedish environmentalist and climate activist Greta Thunberg? She one time branded COP, in fact this year she's not showing up at COP27. She called it that they're just trying to greenwash. They don't really mean for them to push for these changes. So it's just a meeting for formalities, but no actual changes usually takes place after they are done with this. There's no commitment to realize some of these things that they agreed upon. I don't know, what is your thoughts on that, the greenwashing?
Well, Miriam, I think he's right to say that these meetings have been more for brainwashing or more formalities than being result-oriented, because we understand there's so much agreements that have been penned down to paper more often in such kind of summits, but there's not so much tangible coming out of the same. You've clearly alluded to the fact that we've had for the last over 30 years or so, such kind of meetings and summits are taking place. Case in point is just the one we had, I think, last year in Glasgow. That is COP26. And there were a lot of agreements. There were a lot of a commitment put on paper, and there's not so much that has been done in terms of trying to implement this. I'm very glad that this time around, Miriam, the theme of the summit is framed to be anchored on implementation, and I want to hope that it's going really to focus on so much on implementation of the so many agreements, on the so many of commitments that the leaders and the various countries, especially those wealthy countries and the biggest polluters in the world, have committed themselves in terms of helping globally to reduce the effects of the global climatic changes. And so, Miriam, all of us are optimistic that we are going to see a lot of action this time round, and even the 100 billion US dollars that have been promised to be pumped into helping into this initiative, that there's going to be a renewed effort, spirit, and commitment towards making sure that these monies are released for the benefit of the countries that are really struggling in terms of dealing with the effects of the climatic changes globally, and more so the third world countries. And Miriam, as I wind up on this, we all understand today, I mean, the issue of the climatic changes has not only affected in terms of, say, for example, the drought or extreme rainfall. It has also necessitated so much in terms of course, a lack of food, because I mean, our farmers today are not able to cultivate as much as they used to because of the effects of the same. So I really want to hope that there's going to be so much focus on giving finances to try and mitigate the effects of the climatic change, if not to eradicate completely. So we all look forward with a lot of optimism that this time around it's not going to be usual tokenism as has been the tradition, but there's going to be action accompanying the so many treaties and agreements that have been penned down to paper. I submit, Miriam.
Very well, and of course, this COP20, this summit has been taking place for the last 30 years, and the conferences have served for some people who are criticizing this conference. They're saying it serves very little or no purpose at all, and perhaps they do have some good reason to that, because you've seen the greenhouse gas emissions hit a new high in 2021. It set a new record, very high. There's been a loss of biodiversity, and this has been quite rampant. We've seen global warming also becoming a problem, and it has accelerated to levels now. We are seeing the results of it, and this has caused intense heat waves. We've seen the heat waves in India. There's a time people could not even sleep in the houses at night. Even in here, in the country, we've seen the devastating wildfires taking place every now and then. Even just the other week, Mount Kilimanjaro, the government of Tanzania was really fighting the fires that had broke out there. Those are things that you could never hear about. And also we've seen historic floodings, and we are seeing the famine and all these things that are happening. And yet this conference has been taking place for the last 30 years, and some of these commitments that are being made by countries are not being met. And the Paris Climate Agreement, signed in 2015 at COP21, pledged to limit temperatures rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels, but the world is far off track, headed for a rise around 2.5 Celsius by the end of the century. So instead of it decreasing, they're increasing, and that is one of the commitments that they're not really able to meet, and this has been catastrophic. So I know Doc started there when he was explaining, and he was giving his thoughts about the COP27, and he said perhaps it's time we stop the blame game. I don't know how you understand that, especially for the continent.
Yes, indeed, Miriam. I think it is that moment when we should stop blame game altogether, and especially blaming, say, the Western power countries for some of these the challenges that we are going through. But I think I'll also give a benefit of doubt to the African leaders and the African nations, because for one, the African continent is bearing the biggest brunt in terms of the effects of climatic changes, and more of which is not actually prompted in the African continent. And I think that is why you see there's so much focus in terms of what the wealthy nation, the Western power countries, the European nations, say China, Russia, and other nations, which are the biggest polluters in the world, are doing to try and mitigate this. So in as much as we will call upon our leaders to stop the blame game. So much of the focus must be on how some of the agreements and commitment in terms of, say, for example, financing initiatives and projects geared towards mitigating or addressing the effects of the climatic changes are really honored. Because Miriam, I think that this is really the moment. We cannot continue having boardroom meetings every now and then without tangible action being felt on the ground. It is that we will want the leaders and various stakeholders with the boardroom meetings and come out and face the reality out here so that we are able to see them practically engaging in initiatives that are going to address some of the issues that we continue to talk about. So generally, Africa also must look into the issue of financial autonomy or independence because it's one of those obstacles or other issues that are hampering efforts to deal with the effects of climatic change. We do not have, of course, finances of our own, enough resources at our disposal to be able to address some of these issues. Really, to deal with the matters to do with climatic change, Miriam, and carrying out such enormous projects will also require enormous finances and resources. And Africa, understanding its level of its economic level and the level of poverty in the African continent, much as we are suffering out of the devastating effects of the climatic change. But I wanted to find that dealing with the climatic change for Africa will be much more of a priority in terms of pumping in resources. And therefore, it is something that calls for a well-concerted effort from other big players in terms of the biggest polluters in the world. But also to remind the African leaders and the African people that I think the over-reliance on the Western power countries and the wealthy nations in the world has hampered, and we continue really to face the adverse effects of this climatic change. Maybe it is time we also think outside the box, and what is it we can commit as the African people, maybe pulling resources together to one pool as an African to an African pool, so that we are able really to utilize it to deal with this very, very threatening pattern of the climatic changes, Miriam. So the issue of blame game is real. Who has contributed, who has not contributed, who is not doing much, who has done, who has tried his level best. I think it's time to come together and reason together and find a solution to this challenge. Because again, you cannot say that it's a specific country which has been hard hit. It's about the whole continent. So we will need to come together wholly for the purpose of addressing this issue. Because by the end of the day, it is our generation which you are putting at risk. They may not have, say, a continent. They may not have a future altogether. To what is happening today and the effects of the climatic change. So it's incumbent upon us to really rise to the occasion and face the challenge head on and make sure that we do that which is necessary to be able to address and find an amicable solution to this challenge, Miriam.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you so much. Just trying to see what else our viewers are saying here. Susan. All right. Thank you. And the rest of you, I'll look at, you're saying Africa is a wealthy nation. Stand up for your freedom from terrorists and colonizers. Okay. All right. I hear you. Okay. So the first of its kind in this continent. This is the first time Africa is hosting the this conference to be held in this continent. And of course, Africa is the world's least polluting continent. The COP27 is expected to be a milestone for climate justice. That is the attitude African leaders are going there with. We are going to seek justice for some of these things that you're suffering from in this continent. So I think that is one of the key things from our leaders. They're going to seek for climate justice. The countries most vulnerable to climate change intend to join forces and hold industrialized countries to account this year. I don't know if they'll be able to do that. In 2009, wealthy countries pledged to mobilize $100 billion per year. This was supposed to be done per year, not even that was a one time of these developed and industrialized countries that are the huge contributors of pollution. They had pledged to mobilize $1 billion per year starting 2020 for climate action in developing countries. By developed countries now say they won't meet the commitment until 2023 3 years late. So they're saying, I know we promised that we'll start supporting this, and this is the word that we gave you. Every year we'll come together and mobilize about 100 billion US dollars to go in helping the developed countries as far as climate change is concerned. But we'll not be able to honor this commitment until 2023, so perhaps next year. And that will be 3 years late. Only $79.9 billion worth of climate finance have been provided, far less than the $340 billion per year needed for adaptation by 2013. And that is according to the United Nations report. And of course, some people look at this as a platform, an opportunity for the vulnerable countries, especially those from Africa, to speak as equals with the global north. And I think they feel that this will be their greatest strength once they're given that opportunity. I don't know if we are even the people from the global south, which Africa we are part of. I don't know if we can even speak as equals as far as the global north and other spheres, is concerned. But let me first bring in Daniel Besonga this afternoon. Daniel, a very good afternoon to you.
Yes, very good afternoon to you, Miriam. Good afternoon to our viewers who are watching us across the African continent. And it is indeed my pleasure to be on the conversation this particular afternoon.
All right, very well. So we are looking at the COP 27 that is set to take place in El Sheikh, El Shelma in Egypt. And so a lot is happening. And of course, our leaders are going there with some expectation. One, to push for the developed countries to live up to their promise and issue this money that the third world or the developing countries, they had pledged that they will give. They had promised to mobilize 100 billion per year starting 2020, and very few countries have been able to honor that pledge. So I don't know what is your, what do you think is our space as far as this climate change talks are concerned? Some people look at it as this will be an opportunity for us to speak as equals, the global south to go in there and speak as equals to the global north and other countries. But we've seen it's never like that.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And of course, to me, it really doesn't make much of an impact because as far as I know is that Africa as a continent has always worked, to make sure that we conserve our environment. And that is the reason why, even today, as we head towards the December and the holidays, many people from the West are going to be coming back to Africa to be able to enjoy their holidays, to be able to see the wildlife that we have, to drive through our expansive parks, national parks, and be able to enjoy their holiday here in Africa. And the reason is because we have been able to conserve the better part of our environment. And that is why our animals are not extinct like they are in the West, and our parks are still available for even the West itself to come and be able to enjoy themselves while on holiday here in Africa. So what is the point here? The point is that Africa has always been on the forefront to conserve the environment. The biggest forest covers across the world are actually in Africa. Look at the Congo forest, look at the equatorial rainforest of West Africa. These are among the world's major conservancies that are here in the world currently. And when we go to such conferences, Miriam, they will always want to, the West, despite being that they are among the countries that are actually bedeviled by pollution and industrial, waste management challenges, they will always want to read down the rules down to Africa, regardless of the fact that Africa has been a bigger stakeholder in the conservation of our environment in order to be able to combat global warming and climatic change. So to me, I think, Miriam, Africa is yet to receive its position of honor in even these kind of talks and the reason is because Africa does not have the financial muscle or the economic capability. It does not have the political power, neither does it have military capability to be able to compete with these other Western countries. And therefore, the kind of contempt that we are always shown when it comes to even the UN, Security Council and many other important national, international arenas, is the same kind of contempt we are more likely to be treated even in these environmental, initiatives. So I think, Miriam, Africa can embark on what it does on its local basis, and do it to their very best. But, expecting that we shall be prioritized in this kind of conference is a bit overstretching our expectations. But for me, I believe if they were really, really genuine about combating climate change and also reducing global warming, they would have given Africa preeminence in these talks, and not just in talks, but also in funding, so that we are able to increase our forest coverage. We are able to do recycling of waste, or rather waste management. Because, Miriam, you see, most of these chemicals, most of these toxic materials, they come from the industries in the West, and they find their dumping site here in Africa. So if they could help Africa be able to turn around the game in terms of waste management, increasing forest cover, I believe they should do it on an equal basis. But if Africa is going there to play the second fiddle, like we've always done in other important matters surrounding the global arena, then I believe, Miriam, we don't have much we should expect from this, unless the so-called Western superpowers of the G20 takes Africa seriously, and we are given an equal opportunity in solving this global problem. Otherwise, Miriam, I believe from history, we have been always sidelined. They have been always so big when it comes to the talk, but when it comes to walking the talk, very little has been seen in terms of progress. I submit.
All right, thank you. Daniel Wesonga, one of our viewers here, Joseph Otto, you're saying you want to participate as a mini panel today for the first time from there in Denmark. Okay, you can comment there. I will read some of your comments, or I don't know how you mean to participate. You'd like to join our Zoom conversation, you can let me know. So, of course, on 7th, that is tomorrow, there will be the WASP Science for Adaptation Policy Brief on the Global Goal on Adaptation in the 6th issue in the series published by 7 UN agencies that form the World Adaptation Science Program. This issue discusses the global goal on adaptation and its adequacy of adaptive response commensurate with the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement, and a collective effort is required to operationalize the global goal on adaptation, noting that there's no agreed frameworks, methods, indicators, or metrics to assess progress towards the global goal on adaptation. So we've seen this is just part of the explaining part of the agreement that this summit has been having in terms of the emissions and the levels that is acceptable and all that. And starting from when we started from, Samuel Tawish, and we've been having this conversation now, we've seen through statistics that even some of these things that have been agreed upon, the 1.5 Celsius degree being the highest green emission, has been violated, and right now it's over 2.5. So we are far from achieving that. So tomorrow, this is what they shall be looking at. There was Science for Adaptation Policy Brief, and how to operationalize this goal. But how can this goal be achievable when some of the countries that are greater emitters, like China and these other countries, in fact, last year, China did not agree with certain agreements that were made during the COP26. So why we just, and then according to this adaptation policy, there was no agreed frameworks on how these countries are supposed to lower down their emissions. There were no methods or indicators, and there's no metrics to assess progress on how they are doing. So if we don't have these parameters and safeguards in place to ensure that the world is able to reach its goals as far as these emissions are concerned, so how are we supposed to get there, Tawish?
Miriam, we can only get there if there's a will and commitment coming from the stakeholders and all the players that are involved. And I think this lack of it is what has negated the efforts really to be able to realize some of the goals that we have all along set in terms of the summits of similar nature that we have had in the past. And therefore, moving forward, I would really want to see the leaders in this summit really register formally the disappointment and also protest in terms of the failure by, say, concerned parties and stakeholders really to commit to the pledges that they had made during the previous summits, especially the recent one, that is the 2021 in Glasgow. Because Miriam, we cannot continue doing the same thing all over and over again and expect different results. In fact, if it was, in my opinion, the leadership that is really converging in Egypt for this summit should have given this event a wide berth just to register their disappointment, to register their frustration, and of course, and also pass their protest in terms of to push for the commitment and the honoring of the pledges that have been made in the previous summits of similar nature. Because the continued kind of events like these summits, Miriam, where leaders go there and have a minutes of address, and there's nothing that comes out of it. These leaders and all the stakeholders, the players, and everybody else really knows what is supposed to be done, Miriam. It's not that they are ignorant. It's not that they do not know what is supposed to be done. Even those who are supposed to contribute, say financially, exactly know what they're supposed to do. They know the obligations, they know the challenges that come with all this, but I think they have decided just to backslide and frustrate the whole program and the whole initiative altogether. So how can we continue having meetings like Showbiz every now and then when there's nothing really coming out of these meetings? I think that is where my frustration is coming from, and this frustration stems from everybody else in this continent of Africa, especially when we feel like the African people and the African continent are not the greatest polluters in the world. They are trying to commit in terms of trying to implement some of these initiatives. But again, money is the answer to most of these things. And if money has been starved off for these initiatives, then there's nothing that can literally move Miriam. So when these nations, wealthy for that matter, decide even not to give money that is necessary to champion these initiatives, then we will be doing a zero-sum game, Miriam. We will not be achieving anything by the end of the day. We have set ourselves goals that must be achieved. Say, for example, the issue of deforestation. Are we doing so much? Dr. Masanga in his opening remarks did mention about why we must also push for planting of trees. I mean, as one way, an easier one maybe of dealing with the climatic change. But how many of us, how many of the African countries are trying to really carry out such kind of initiatives? We continue with the blame game every now and then when our environment continues to be polluted and becomes toxic for life every elapsing minute. So Miriam, a new thing must be done. A new commitment must be put in place this time round. I only but want to hope that we are going to have the last ever summit where leaders come and submit 5 or 10 minutes speech and with their big delegations to give back to their countries without so much. We want to see really commitment accompanying these kinds of meetings, so that by the end of the day, there's something we can really making progress, and we will be able to do an audit in terms of what are some of the areas that we have not been able to achieve, what are the setbacks to achieve those, to be able to achieve those goals, and what new approach or strategy we can employ to be able to realize those goals. So it's that calls for a more, I would say, some level of seriousness as compared to other or previous summits that we have had.
Okay, thank you so much. And as we conclude, Daniel, while we were at the start of this conversation, you were not there yet. And so we looked at how, as much as these talks are quite monumental and they're intended to bring solutions on how to tackle climate change, but really, according to the statistics that we have out there, things continue to get worse. I don't think the solutions of anything that we can write home about. And so one climate activist. I know you know her, Greta Thunberg. This year she said she will not be attending the COP27. Last year when she attended the COP26 in Glasgow, she said that the conference is just greenwashing and it's not really meant to change the whole system. So it was just like a formality, but it's not really a change agent. And Samuel Tawish there has said that perhaps it could be important, instead of these leaders, especially from the developing world, just showing up and their and their entourage, perhaps they would have boycotted in protest of these developed countries not meeting their side of the bargain. But that brings into focus the unity of purpose that perhaps lacks in, especially in Africa. So I don't know, such a drastic move like boycotting the event. Do you think that would have, forced them to listen and perhaps honor part of their promise?
Absolutely, Miriam. And my brother Tarwish Olesasina has actually brought it quite auspiciously. And to me, why would I rather attend a conference that has been there for a couple of times, and each and every time new resolutions are brought on board, new plans and new agendas are brought on board, whereas the previous agendas for the other meetings or the other conferences haven't yet been met? I think it's a waste of time, it's a waste of resources, and the best way forward for that is actually to boycott it until the previous pledges, the previous promises have been fulfilled. We have no business, Miriam, sitting, wasting time and, talking about new other ideas. And, there's nothing actually being done to resolve the problem at hand. And I totally agree that, if we have to achieve progress in this, global climatic, initiative, then we must mean business. And Tarwish has said that, we are so good at making very, very vibrant speeches, beautiful speeches, very promising for the future. But when it comes to walking the talk, that is where now the rain starts beating us. So I think, Miriam, it's only okay that we actually concentrate on, first of all, fulfilling the previous pledges before we can be able to actually bring anything more extra on the table. So to me, I think it's a waste of time. It is all meant for cosmetics. If you are not seeing the results on the ground, then there's no need of actually people traveling, spending a lot of millions of dollars in per diem, for their delegations and all that. We would rather invest that money in actually planting more trees, in managing waste, and just making sure that we prevent environmental degradation. Other than spending millions of dollars, traveling, going to have coffee and wine in a first world country, with the pretense of, solving a certain global, climatic crisis. So to me, Miriam, by boycotting to go to Egypt, amongst other, by the players who are supposed to be at the forefront in this particular initiative, is just a show of protest. And I believe in the future, if we do not show any resolve, if we do not show any results, then more players should actually boycott such an event, so that we do not have to waste a lot of money, time, and resource while doing nothing at it. So to me, I think that is the best way. That is the best way to protest until the conveners of such conferences actually start talking start walking the talk. Otherwise, Miriam, I believe that is quite much in order. And what I expect is that now in the coming days, they're gonna go back to the previous, the previous pledges that were made in order to improve our climatic condition, and be able to implement that, so that in the next conference, they talk about what they have done vis-a-vis what is pending and what ought to be done in the future. Not just meeting, giving beautiful speeches, promising, to do this and that. And at the end of the day, when they meet after a year or so, it is the same thing, whereas our climate is actually deteriorating by day. So I believe, Miriam, it is no longer tenable. We need action. We need people who can actually work to deliver. If anything is to go by, I remember there's a time even the United States of America under Donald Trump withdrew from such initiatives. And it is because those who convene these initiatives do not really work seriously and tirelessly to make sure that they succeed. Rather, they are all there for show and cosmetics, whereas inside the house, everything seems to be decaying, everything seems to be not in order. We need action, Miriam, and action can only be seen when we start having numbers which are promising in terms of carbon emission into our atmosphere, when we start seeing forest covers across the globe actually increasing, when we start seeing so many companies, manufacturing factories being compliant with the act of, the Global Climatic Act. So unless we see these drastic changes, Miriam, in the coming future, in the coming future, we I might not say that we might see more leaders or maybe more stakeholders going to these conferences. They actually will boycott. So it is within their right when they see that everything is not going into the right direction and whatever is happening is not something substantial but a waste of their time. They have all the rights to actually decline this invitation and not to associate themselves with something that sounds to be like a Ponzi scheme where money is only squandered and results are not there to be seen. I submit, Miriam.
All right, very well, thank you. Joseph Otto Manasseh, you said you wanted to join through Zoom because you really wanted to contribute to this conversation. Unfortunately, I'm just seeing this message right now and our time is up. I'm just trying to see something that you'd written up there. And you're saying Africans should stop overrating things. The strike at the airport in Kenya is the same thing that we have actually several times here in Denmark. All right. Very well. No, there's something you'd written about. Okay, we said we have food in my village called Polge at the border with Uganda. And Polge is a no man's land in Pajok, South Sudan, called Nkom, Oromo, where the earth has met. And you're saying there are a lot of things that grow here, from fruits to other indigenous foods like sorghum and all that, millet, sweet potatoes. And you're saying you don't use money there, but use the land. We as well have goats and chickens and all these things. So you're saying we really don't need the money. We don't need the dollars. That's what you've said. So people just have to make use of what we have. And I think that is the conversation that Africans must start looking to have conversations about. I was just having a conversation with someone earlier today, and we're just looking at the way things are right now with the climate change and all these extreme weather patterns. And you realize, like a place in Kenya, we are really blessed. Even the places that are the arid and semi-arid, counties that, have these high levels of sunshine and all that. I mean, we could harness that. We could harness that and use it for other goods. It's possible. I think we just need a leadership with a good vision. I think it's very much possible. All these things that we seem to think are working against us, actually we could use them for our own good if at all we had leaders who know what they're doing up there. But that is a conversation we shall have another time. So this year's UN Climate Conference takes place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt against the backdrop of extreme weather events worldwide, an energy crisis propelled by the war in Ukraine, and scientific data reiterating that the world is not doing enough to tackle carbon emissions and protect the future of our planet. The Secretary General has said of the United Nations, that is Guterres, has said that COP27 must deliver a down payment on climate solutions that match the scale of the problem. And so we're waiting to see if the leaders will deliver. So the conference officially kicks off today. That is the 6th of November. And the COPs are the biggest and most important annual climate-related conferences on the planet. In 1992, the UN organized the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, in which a UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, was adopted and its coordinating agency, what we know now as the UN Climate Change Secretariat, was put in place then in 1992. In this treaty, nations agreed to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere to prevent dangerous interference from human activity on the climate system. And so far, 197 different parties have signed it. Now, since 1994, when the treaty entered into force every year, the UN has been bringing together almost every country on Earth for global climate summits, or the COPs, which stands for the Conference of the Parties. And during these meetings, nations have negotiated various extensions of the regional treaty to establish legally binding limits on emissions. For example, the Kyoto Protocol, that remember was signed in 1997, and then you do have the Paris Agreement that was adopted in 2015, and in which all countries of the world agreed to step up efforts to try and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures and boost climate action financing. And this year marks 27 annual summit, otherwise known as COP27. So this was agreed on long time, but as we have seen throughout the conversation, nothing is getting better. Things are only getting worse. So why are we still meeting? Why do we still have this climate change summit every year? So this is a conversation we shall continue having for the rest of this coming week as the COP27 takes place in Egypt. There, I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you, Samuel Tawish. Thank you, Daniel Osonga, and of course, Dr. David Matanga, who joined us at the beginning of the show. He's stuck somewhere, but on transit. So hopefully we'll have him tomorrow. I'll be back here tomorrow, God willing, with more news from across the continent of Africa. A lot is happening, and I think we need to know about that. My name is Miriam Mugutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.